The chamber was enormous. It could hold 10,000 people if it needed to, but on most days it held fewer than 300. The ceiling was so high that the top of it disappeared into a pale blue haze, and the walls were lined with seats arranged in wide curving rows, each row belonging to a different species, each species wearing different clothes, breathing different air, sitting under different lights. The galactic concord had been meeting in this chamber for over 2,000 years. It had settled wars. It had drawn borders. It had decided the fate of entire worlds, with nothing more than words and votes. Today it felt like a funeral. The shrill ambassador sat in the front row, his long feathered neck held straight and still, his 3 eyes fixed on the central podium. Hana'd know he was older than most species in the room, had been spacefaring, and he had learned long ago that patience was not weakness. It was simply the correct response to a situation that could not be solved by rushing. The Vreth Dominion had glassed 3 human colony worlds in the past 6 weeks. 3 worlds, tens of thousands of people gone. The shrill ambassador had seen worse in his lifetime, much worse. That did not mean he did not feel it. He simply did not let feeling get in the way of thinking. The Kethsura representative was already speaking. She was a tall creature, thin as a wire, with pale gray skin and 4 arms that she kept folded neatly in front of her. When she was not gesturing, she spoke in the measured, even tone that the Kethsura were known for, like someone reading numbers from a ledger. The Vreth Dominion commands 912 active warships, she said. Their weapons technology exceeds the current human military capacity by a factor of 3.7. Their defensive shielding has not been breached in recorded combat history. Their ultimatum is clear. They want the 7 border systems currently designated as human territory. If humanity complies, the attacks will stop. She paused and looked around the room. If humanity does not comply, the Dominion has stated its intention to continue until there are no human worlds left to destroy. Silent, the Vathan elder shifted in his seat. He was ancient, his kind measured age in centuries rather than years, and he looked every bit of it. His skin was the color of dry stone, and his eyes were deep-set and dark. When he spoke, his voice was slow and careful, like someone moving heavy things. This council has seen ultimatums before, he said. Some were real threats, some were words. But the Vreth Dominion has already demonstrated its willingness to act. 3 colonies gone. They are not bluffing. Then what are you suggesting? Asked the representative from the Murrith, a small, quick-moving species who always sat near the back and always asked the direct question that everyone else was dancing around. I am suggesting, the Vathan elder said, that humanity consider the terms. The room did not erupt. It was not that kind of room. But there was a shift, a change in the quality of the silence, like the air before a storm. Yelmaro sat at the human delegation table and said nothing, while she was not what most species expected when they imagined a human ambassador. She was not young, and GT, clear as throat. And GT, she was not loud. She was a small woman, with short gray hair and tired eyes, wearing a plain dark jacket with the Earth flag stitched onto the left shoulder, a blue circle with green shapes on it, simple as something a child might draw. She had been listening for nearly 2 Hours without speaking, she had a glass of water in front of her that she had not touched. The Cathar representative continued. We do not say this lightly, but the realistic analysis of the situation is this. Humanity cannot win a military engagement against the Wraith Dominion, not with the forces currently available. The border systems, while valuable, are not worth. They are not border systems, Yale Mara said. Her voice was not loud, it was not angry, but it was just clear. The way a cold morning is clear. The representative stopped. They are homes, Yale Morrow said. People live there, people were born. Their children grew up there. You are describing them as if they are pieces on a table that can be moved around. They are not, they are places where people planted gardens and named streets and built schools. She looked at the representative without blinking. So, no, we will not be considering the terms. The Vathan elder leaned forward slightly. Director Morrow, we understand the emotional weight of what has happened, but the survival of your species must take priority over the survival of our species, Yale Morrow said quietly, is exactly what we are talking about. She reached down and picked up a small device from the table. She looked at it for a moment, just a moment, and then she set it down again. When the first colony was attacked, she said, our government convened an emergency session, not like this one. Vaster. We did not spend 2 hours reviewing the Dominion's fleet numbers. We spent 2 hours deciding what to do about them. And GT, clears throat. And GT, she looked around the room slowly. We have already responded, the Marath representative leaned forward. What do you mean you have already responded? I mean that we sent a ship. The room was quiet in a different way. Now, one ship, the representative said. It was not quite a question. One ship, Yale Morrow confirmed. The shrill ambassador's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign those who knew his species understood of deep confusion. Director Morrow, either Vireth Dominion, has 900 warships. Sending one vessel into their territory is not a military response. It is what we decided, Yale Morrow said. Simply, it is suicide, the Bothan elder said. Yale Morrow looked at him. Her expression did not change. She should be in their sensor reign. About now, she said. Far from the chamber in the cold dark, between star systems, a Vireth scout ship was doing what scout ships did. It sat still at the edge of Dominion space, running its sensors in slow sweeping arcs. And GT snorts. And GT watching for anything that did not belong. The crew of 7 had been on patrol for 11 days. Nothing had happened, nothing ever happened out here. The nearest human colony was several light hours away, or it had been before the Dominion fleet had reduced it to rock and ash. Only the sensor officer was the first to see it. He stared at his screen for 3 full seconds before he said anything, because what he was seeing did not make sense. Single contact moving faster than anything the Vireth fleet could produce. At that size, no identification signal, no communication, no request for passage or recognition, just a shape on a screen moving in a straight line directly into Dominion space. Contact, he said. The captain crossed the floor in 4 quick steps and looked at the screen. over the sensor officer's shoulder. "What is it?" the captain asked. "Human configuration, the sensor." Officer said, "Warship class, I've never seen this exact model before." He ran a quick comparison against the Dominion's records of human military vessels. The computer found partial matches but nothing exact, and it's new. How new? "I don't know. We don't have records of it." The captain studied the contact for a long moment. Then he reached for the communications panel and opened a channel to the nearest Dominion fleet. "Command station. This is Scout Vessel 7 reporting. Contact, single human warship unknown. Classification, entering Dominion space. At high speed, it is not responding to standard warnings." He paused. "It is alone." He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice had changed slightly. A small change, but the communications officer noticed it. "It is not slowing down." Back in the conquered chamber, the silence had a different quality now. It was not the silence of people thinking, it was the silence of people who did not know what to think. The shrill ambassador was very still, because he was old enough to have a feel for moments, for the ones that seemed ordinary and turned out to be important, and for the ones that felt like nothing and were actually the turning point of everything. He had a feeling about this one. He looked at Yale Morrow. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table, looking straight ahead. She was not nervous. She was not performing calm. She was simply calm, the way someone is calm when they have already done the hard thing and now they are just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "One ship," the shrill ambassador said. Again, not to challenge her, just to understand. "One ship," she said. "Why?" the Votan elder asked, not in the tone of someone demanding an explanation, in the tone of someone who genuinely wanted to understand something they did not yet understand. "Mushiel." Morrow thought about the question. She turned the glass of water on the table slowly with her fingers. Then she said something that the official Concord record would later describe as the most translated sentence in the history of the organization, translated into 47 languages, quoted in diplomatic texts, printed on walls and repeated in schools. "Because we wanted them to know," she said, "that we are not asking for help. We are not waiting for permission, and we are not afraid." She looked up at the Vathan elder. "One ship says all three of those things at the same time." The elder was quiet for a long moment. "And if she is destroyed?" the Kesari representative asked. Yale Morrow looked at her. "Then we will send another one." The ship's name was the UES Inexorable. She was not beautiful, but she was not meant to be. She was long and dark, built in angles rather than curves, with thick armor plating layered in Clear's throat, overlapping sheets like scales. Her weapon systems were not visible from the outside. They were fitted flush with the hull, retracted until needed, invisible at a distance. She looked at first glance like a heavy piece of industrial equipment, a tool built for hard work in hard places. She was that. She was also something more. She had been in development for 12 years, which was a short time by the standards of most spacefaring species, but a very long time by human standards. She had been built after the first border skirmishes with the VREF Dominion, built not in response to a specific threat but in response to a feeling that the galaxy was not as safe as humanity's conquered membership made it seem. A feeling that being a small, young species in a very large and very old universe meant that sometimes no one was coming to help. She was built to go in alone. She was designed from the beginning with that in mind, every system redundant, every section capable of operating independently, every crew member trained in 3 jobs instead of 1. Her reactor could sustain combat output for 90 hours without resupply. Her armor could absorb the equivalent of 4 direct hits from Vreth capital ship weapons without losing structural integrity. Her engines had a range and speed that no Vreth tactical manual had ever accounted for, because no Vreth tactical manual had ever imagined her. Well, Captain Jonas Hale stood on the bridge and watched the Vreth border slide past on the navigation screen. He was not a large man, medium height, medium build, with short dark hair that had a little gray in it near the sides. Now, though he was only 43, he had a face that had seen a lot of weather, not literally, but in the way that some faces collect the years and show them honestly. His eyes were the kind of brown that looked almost black in low light. He had been to Kepler 9 colony once, 3 years ago, a supply inspection routine. Boring, 3 days of walking through warehouses and signing forms. He remembered a street market he had walked through on the second evening just to get some air. Someone had been cooking something that smelled like cinnamon. Children had been running between the stalls. A very old man had been sitting on a folding chair outside a shop, reading something on a thin screen, completely at peace. Kepler 9 was ash now. Captain, Commander Priya Voss appeared at his side holding a status pad. She was taller than him by several inches, with dark eyes and dark hair pulled back, and a way of standing that suggested she could carry a lot without complaining about it. She had been his XO for 4 years. He trusted her more than anyone alive. We're past the boundary marker, officially in Dominion space. Officially, he said. The scout ship logged us about 6 minutes ago, she said. Fleet Command will know we're here within the hour. Good, he said. She looked at him. You want them to know? I want them to have time to think about it, he said, before we get there. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Jonas, the crew. He knew what she meant. He looked out at the bridge, 12 people at their stations, each one focused on their screens, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had trained hard for a long time. 12 on the bridge, 300 more throughout the ship. 312 people who had said yes when he had asked them individually, one by one, in his office, whether they understood what this mission was. None of them had said no. They know, he said. They do, she agreed. She looked at her pad for a moment, then she reached across and touched the corner of her console, the corner where she had taped the photograph. It was a simple photo, printed on paper, which was unusual. It showed a field of something yellow, and some kind of flower with low mountains in the background and a wide, pale sky. It was from Kepler 9. She had been born there. She had left when she was 7 years old, when her family had moved to Earth, and she had not been back. She had been meaning to go back. Next year, she had kept telling herself. Next year. Helm, Captain Hale said. His voice was steady and clear. Maintain heading, increase to full cruise speed. Aye, sir, the helmsman said. Exorable pressed forward through the Dark in the conquered chamber, the session had technically ended, but most of the delegations had not left. They stood in small groups, speaking in low voices, or sat alone at their tables, looking at nothing in particular. Shriel ambassador stood at the tall observation window that ran along the eastern wall of the chamber. Through it you could see the planet. Below, the conquered's host world, a green and white sphere turning slowly in the light of its sun. He had stood at this window many times. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. The Vathan elder was there, moving slowly, leaning on a long staff that he carried more out of habit than necessity. "What do you think will happen?" the elder asked. The Shriel ambassador thought about the question honestly. "I think the Dominion will destroy that ship," he said, "and I think that humanity will send another one, and another, and I think eventually they will either win or be completely destroyed, and either outcome will change everything." The elder looked at him. "You admire them." "I am confused by them," the ambassador said, "which at my age is close to the same thing." He turned back to the window. "They sent one ship, elder, not because they thought it would be enough, not because they did not understand the odds. They understand the odds. They sent one ship because he stopped." "Because what?" the elder asked. The ambassador was quiet for a long time. "Below the planet turned because they wanted the Dominion to know what kind of people they are dealing with," he finally said, "before things get worse." Down at the human delegation table, Yale Mara was still sitting in her chair. She had finally picked up her glass of water. She took a sip, set it down, turned to, and looked at the device on the table. The small communications device that would tell her when the inexorable made contact with Dominion forces. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she folded her hands in her lap and waited. She was very good at waiting, but she was also very good at knowing that some things, once started, did not stop until they were finished. The inexorable was in Dominion space now, moving fast, broadcasting nothing, asking for nothing. Somewhere out in the dark, a VREF fleet commander was looking at a screen and trying to understand what he was seeing. He would understand soon enough. Yale Morrow picked up her glass again and finished the water. The first thing Vreth Admiral was read it twice. He was not a careless man. He had commanded fleets for 30 years, which in Vreth terms meant he had fought more battles than most of his officers had read about. He was methodical, careful, and experienced enough to know that the most dangerous thing any commander could do was assume. So he read the report twice, made sure he understood every word, and then called his senior staff together in the command center of the Vreth Dominion's border fleet flagship. The flagship was an enormous ship, nearly 2 km long, with enough firepower to reduce a moon to rubble and enough armor to survive the attempt. It sat at the center of a formation of 40 warships arranged in a tight defensive pattern near the edge of the Dominion's inner border. The formation had been put there as a precaution after the colony attacks, in case humanity tried something reckless. Admiral Kas Vera now understood that humanity had in fact tried something reckless. "One ship," said his tactical officer, a young Vreth named Gretsoa, who had the look of someone trying to decide whether he was allowed to laugh. "They sent one ship." "I can read," the admiral said. Sir, one ship against 40. I know what 40 is, the Admiral said. His voice was flat. I also know that we don't have classification records on this vessel. It's new. We don't know what it can do. He looked around the table at his senior officers. I want 3 intercept formations. Ready. I want weapons hot before they enter range. I want every scanner on full power, and I want every reading sent directly to me. He paused. I do not want anyone making assumptions. His officers looked at each other. 1 ship, 40 warships. Surely the math was not complicated. Yes, sir, Grasso said. He did not quite manage to hide a small smile. The Admiral looked at him. For a moment, he had been in enough battles to know that the moments that felt easy were often the ones worth being careful about. He had a feeling. Nothing solid, just a feeling that this was one of those moments. He did not share this feeling with his officers. They would have smiled at that too. Below decks on the Inexorable, in the engineering section that ran along the lower third of the ship, Chief Engineer Dara Okafor was running diagnostics that she had already run twice that morning. She was 31 years old, small and quick-moving, with close-cropped hair, and a habit of talking to the ship when she thought nobody was listening. Reactor output is smooth, she told the ship, or possibly her junior engineer, Marcus Chen, who was working nearby and had long since learned to tell the difference between when she was talking to him and when she was talking to the ship. This was the ship. Cooling is good. Power distribution looks clean. You're doing well. She always does well, Marcus said. She does, Dara agreed. She looked at the main reactor display. A column of soft light that ran from floor to ceiling in the center of the engineering bay, showing output levels, temperature, and pressure in real time. The reactor was the heart of the Inexorable, and Dara thought about it the same way a surgeon thinks about a heart, with deep respect and a healthy fear of what happens when it stops. The reactor had been the hardest part to build, not because the technology was new, it was, but that was manageable. More than it was hard because what they needed from it was genuinely extraordinary, a reactor that could powerful weapons, full shields, full engines, and all life support simultaneously for extended periods without failure. Previous human warships had been built with the understanding that in a serious fight you had to choose weapons or speed, shields or weapons. You could not have everything at once. The Inexorable could. It had taken 3 years of engineering work to make that possible, and Dara had been part of the team for 2 of those years. She knew the reactor the way she knew her own hands, every system, every tolerance, every quirk. She knew that the secondary coolant loop made a very faint clicking sound under high load that was completely normal and drove less experienced engineers crazy. She knew that the power distribution grid performed best when maintained at exactly 94% capacity rather than pushed to maximum. She knew all of this because she had spent 2 years learning it and 1 year living with it. She loved the ship. That was perhaps a strange thing for an engineer to feel, but she did not think it was strange. The Inexorable was the best thing humans had ever built, in her opinion. Not the most beautiful, not the most elegant, but the best in the sense that it was the most honest. It did exactly what it was built to do, without pretense and without waste. Soft tone sounded through the ship. All hands, Captain Hale's voice came. Over the intercom, calm and clear. Enemy contact in 40 minutes. Battle. Stations. Dara looked at the reactor one more time, then she looked at Marcus, who had already put down his tools and was moving to his battle station. Here we go, he said. Here we go, she agreed. The Vreth intercept formation came out of their holding positions in 3 groups, spreading wide to form a containment net. 40 warships moving in practiced formation, covering every angle of approach. The calculations were not complicated. The human ship would have to slow down to engage, and when it did, it would be the only way out was through them. On the bridge of the inexorable, Captain Hale watched the Vreth formation take shape on the tactical display. 40 contact, the tactical officer, Lieutenant Ray Osaka, reported. Voice was steady. He was 26 years old and had never been in a real battle. He had trained for this moment for 3 years. He found to his mild surprise constant. He was not afraid. He was focused. The way you are focused when you are doing something difficult that you have practiced many times, spreading into containment pattern. They're covering all angles. Expected, Hale said. They're targeting us, Osaka said. Weapons are hot on all 40. Also expected, Hale said. He looked at Commander Voss, who was at the secondary station to his right. She looked back at him. Something passed between them, not fear, not excitement, but a kind of quiet acknowledgement. They were here. They were doing this. There was nothing more to decide. Vera, Hale said, the ship's AI, responded immediately. Her voice was clear and unhurried, with a slightly formal quality that the crew had learned to find reassuring. Captain, what's your read? Standard breath containment formation, Vera said. When optimized for engagement against a vessel that would attempt to break through their perimeter, their firing solutions assume we will try to pick a gap and accelerate through it. A brief pause. They are expecting us to run. We're not running, Hale said. No. Vera agreed. We are not. Another pause, slightly longer. I snort should note that my probability calculations for this engagement have a margin of error of approximately 30%, which is unusually high. This is because we have no combat data on how this ship performs against this opponent at this scale. Essentially, Captain, I know what we are capable of in theory. I do not know what we are capable of in practice. Neither do they, Boss said quietly. Correct, Vera said. That is the relevant variable. The Vreth formation opened fire at maximum range. The first volley hit the inexorable across the forward hull. 6 strikes in rapid succession, heavy energy weapons that would have torn through any other human ship currently in service. The bridge shook, lights flickered on every other vessel in humanity's fleet. Those 6 hits would have been the end, or close to it. The inexorable shook, steadied, and kept going. Hull integrity 93%, OSI reported. Armor held, forward plating is warm but functional. Return fire, Hale said, targets 1 through 8 primary weapons. The inexorable's weapons were something the Vreth had not encountered before and could not have prepared for, because no intelligence report had ever described them accurately. They were not energy weapons which the Vreth knew how to handle. They were not conventional projectile weapons either, which the Vreth also knew how to handle. They were something between kinetic accelerators that fired rounds, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, combined with a focused energy discharge. On impact that disrupted the target's power grid, the VRETH ships had armor designed for energy weapons. They did not have armor designed for this. 8 ships on the left flank of the VRETH formation took hits almost simultaneously. 3 lost power immediately, 2 lost propulsion, 2 suffered hull breaches. 1 took a hit directly to its reactor housing and went dark so fast it looked like someone had simply turned off a light. The VRETH formation hesitated. Admiral Costas Vera, watching from his flagship, understood in that moment that the smile on Gresso's face had been exactly as wrong as he had feared. HUD knew. Targeting solutions, he ordered, his voice harder now. Focus all fire on their weapon systems. Don't try to destroy them. Disable their guns. It was the right tactical call. He made it quickly, which was a sign of how good a commander he was. It was also, as it turned out, not enough. The inexorable did not continue on its original heading. It turned fast, much faster than a ship of its mass should have been able to, and drove directly into the left side of the Wraith formation, where 7 ships had just been disabled. The gap they had left was not large, but it was large enough. And the inexorable went through it at speed, turning the containment net from a cage into a problem. Now some of the Wraith ships were behind the inexorable and firing on her meant firing toward other Wraith ships on the opposite side. She's using our own formation against us, said. His voice was different now. The smile was gone. I can see that, the Admiral said. Redistribute, Groups 2 and 3. Break formation and pursue, Group 1. Hold position and maintain fire. The inexorable did not slow down. It moved through the scattered Wraith ships like something that had decided to stop caring about the walls and go directly through them, taking hits, absorbing them, shaking under the impacts but not stopping. Every time it took fire, it returned it. Every time a Wraith ship lined up a shot, Vera had already calculated where it would aim and moved the inexorable 3 seconds ahead of the solution. It was not graceful, it was not elegant, it was relentless. On the bridge, Ryosei was reporting damage and targets in a steady stream. Main hull at 89%, port thruster slightly reduced, 3 crew injured. The secondary corridor when a hit caused a pressure seal to fail. Weapons functioning normally, all systems functioning. Contact 14, Ase said. He's trying to get behind us. Vera, Hale said. Already adjusting, Vera said. The inexorable spun on its axis in a way that contradicted what most species believed about physics in large ships. Contact 14, which had been lining up a shot from behind, found itself suddenly looking at the inexorable's main weapons array from directly in front. Contact 14 did not survive the next 4 seconds. The battle lasted 11 minutes. At the end of it, the VRETH border fleet had lost 14 ships destroyed, 9 disabled, and the rest were falling back to regroup, and the inexorable had hull integrity at 89%, a slightly reduced port thruster, and 14 crew members injured, none fatally. Admiral Cosvera stared at the tactical display for a long time after ordering the retreat. Gretsoa was very quiet. The Admiral thought about what he had just seen. He thought about it carefully, the way he thought about everything, systematically, without letting his feelings get ahead of his analysis. The human ship was faster than expected, more maneuverable than expected. Its weapons were unlike anything in their intelligence files, and it fought in a way that was genuinely difficult to predict. Not because it was random, but because it seemed to be making different decisions in different moments, adapting to the situation in ways that static tactical doctrine could not keep up with. He thought about all of this, and then he reached for his long-range communications array. He opened a channel directly to the Dominion capital. "This is Admiral Cosvera," he said. I'm reporting engagement with a single human warship of unknown classification. The vessel has defeated my border fleet formation and continued on its original, heading deeper into Dominion space. He paused for a moment. He was not a man who used dramatic language. He believed in precision, but he chose his next words deliberately because he wanted the people receiving this message to understand exactly what he was saying. "Send everything," he said. On the inexorable. When the last Vreth ship broke off and retreated, the bridge was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of shock, the silence of people who had been working very hard, suddenly allowed to breathe. Captain Hale looked at the tactical display. The contacts were retreating. The space ahead of them was clear. "Damage report," he said. OSI delivered it quickly. 89% hull integrity, port thruster at 80% output, 14 injured, none critically. 3 minor system faults, all manageable. Hale nodded. He looked at Boss. She was looking at her screen, but he could see the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Just slightly, because she was not the kind of person who relaxed completely until they were home, and they were a very long way from home. He looked at the corner of her console. The photograph was still there. The yellow flowers, the pale sky, the low mountains. He looked forward again. "Helm," he said. His voice was the same as it always was, steady, clear. "Course, maintain heading." "Aye, sir," the helmsman said. Inexorable pressed deeper into the dark. Behind them, somewhere in the cold space, they had left the pieces of 14 Vreth warships drifted slowly apart. A Vreth admiral sat in his command chair and said nothing for a very long time. And across the galaxy, in a chamber where 47 species had been watching the live sensor feed that the Concord's observation network had quietly been recording, something happened that had not happened in a very long time. Nobody spoke. Not for a long time. It was the Mirth representative who finally broke the silence. She was not a species given to understatement. She looked at the data on her screen. 1 ship, 11 minutes, 40 warships. Do the math, and she said the thing that everyone in the room was thinking but had not yet put into words. "What?" she said very quietly. "Have they built?" Nobody answered, but everyone looked, without quite meaning to, at Yale Morrow. The human ambassador was sitting at her table with her hands folded and her eyes straight ahead. And if she heard the question, she gave no sign. She was waiting. There was still a long way to go. The Breath Supreme Commander's name was Droth Vo, and he had not slept in 22 hours. He stood at the center of the Dominion Strategic Command Center on the Capital World, a room designed for exactly this kind of moment filled with screens and consoles, and officers who had trained there entire careers to manage large-scale military operations. The room was built to handle a crisis of any size. It had been built by a civilization with 3,000 years of continuous warfare behind it. It was, by any objective measure, one of the most sophisticated military command facilities in the known galaxy. Droth Vo was not feeling sophisticated. He was feeling something he had not felt in a very long time. Something he had not felt if he was being honest with himself, since he was a young officer watching his first major battle from a support vessel and understanding, really understanding, that he could die. The feeling was not comfortable. It sat in his chest like something cold and hard, and no amount of experience or rank seemed to make it go away. He was feeling it because of a single ship report, he said. His senior tactical officer, Breath Commander Sun Ro, was a thin, age-precise individual who had served in this command for 15 years and had never once looked uncertain. She looked a little uncertain now. The human vessel has bypassed Admiral Kastira's border formation, she said. 14 ships destroyed, 9 disabled, the rest have retreated to secondary positions. She paused. The human vessel is continuing on its original, heading deeper into Dominion space at approximately 70% of its previous speed. It has taken some damage. We estimate hull integrity in the mid to high 80s, but it is still fully functional. The Gauntlet, Drakvo said. Yes. Sanro said, the positioning fleet is already moving into place. 200 warships, 3 battle stations, the weapons platforms along the Shen corridor. Tool me, it will be fully deployed within 4 hours. She straightened slightly. The Gauntlet has never failed, Supreme Commander. It was designed to destroy anything that enters it. No ship, not ours, not anyone's, could survive it. Drakvo looked at the screen showing the human ship's progress marker, a single small dot moving through Dominion space, slow and steady and completely alone. He thought about what Admiral Kastira had said in his report, not just the tactical details. Those were concerning but explicable. He thought about what the Admiral had said at the very end of the report, almost as an afterthought. After all the data and analysis, I don't think it's afraid. Kastira was not a poetic man. He was not given to observations about the emotional state of enemy vessels. For him to include that sentence, that single sentence, in an official after-action report meant that it had stayed with him, that he had thought about it and decided it needed to be said. Drakvo had read that sentence 3 times. Deploy the Gauntlet, he said. His voice was steady. Whatever he was feeling was not in his voice. Full deployment, nothing held in reserve. I want that ship stopped in the Shen corridor. Yes, Supreme Commander. He turned back to the screen. The small dot was still moving. Ensign Ro, he said, sir, I want every moment of this engagement recorded, he said. Every sensor reading, every communication, everything. He looked at the dot. Whether we win or lose, I want to know exactly what happened in that corridor. Ensign Ro looked at him for a brief moment, long enough to understand that the Supreme Commander had included the second possibility not as a formality, but as a genuine contingency. Yes, Supreme Commander, she said. The crew of the Inexorable rested in shifts for The 12 hours before they reached the Shen corridor, Captain Hale had ordered it not. Suggested, ordered. He had seen enough to know that tired people made mistakes, and mistakes in the next few hours would be the kind you did not come back from. So the crew slept in shifts, ate in shifts, and quietly prepared for what was coming. In the small galley on deck 3, group of 6 crew members were sharing a meal at a table that was bolted to the floor the way everything was bolted to everything on a warship. The cook, a man named Fenn, had made something that resembled a stew in the way that a rough sketch resembles a painting. You could tell what it was trying to be. Nobody complained. Fenn was an excellent gunner and a mediocre cook, and that was fine because the ship needed excellent gunners more than it needed excellent stew. How many ships do you think they'll send? Asked one of the younger crew members, a systems monitor named Petra, who was 19 years old and had qualified for this posting by scoring higher on the inexorable systems assessment than any candidate in the program's history. All of them, said Gunner Second Class Way, without looking up from her bowl. She was in her 30s, compact and direct, with a way of saying things that suggested she had thought about them. First, if I were them, hey, I'd send all of them. That's a lot of ships, Petra said. Yes, Way said. Petra thought about this. She was young enough that the reality of what they were doing was still something she had to think about carefully to fully grasp. She had understood it intellectually. Before they left, she was very intelligent, and she had read all the briefing materials twice. But there was a difference between understanding something and feeling the weight of it, and she was starting to feel the weight. Are you scared? She asked Way. Way finally looked up. She considered the question honestly, which Petra appreciated. Yes, she said, but I was scared on the qualification test too. And I passed that. Being scared just means you understand the stakes. It doesn't tell you anything about what you'll do. Fenn stirred his stew. Eat, my grandmother used to say that. Brave people are just scared people who went anyway. Your grandmother sounds smart, Petra said. She was terrifying, Fenn said without any regret. Somewhere above them, through the hull and the armor and the cold between stars, the Shen corridor was waiting. The Shen corridor was a stretch of space between 2 dense asteroid fields, approximately 11 million kilometers long and 4 million kilometers wide. It was, in theory, open space. But the breath had spent 20 years turning it into something else. The 3 battle stations sat at the far end of the corridor, each one the size of a small moon, armed with weapons that could track and target objects moving at 4 times the speed the inexorable was capable of. Along the walls of the corridor, the edges defined by the asteroid fields, the Verith had installed weapons platforms, hundreds of them, fixed guns that created overlapping fields of fire across every possible path through the corridor, and the 200 warships were arranged layered defensive formation spread through the corridor at regular intervals so that any ship trying to pass through would face wave after wave of concentrated fire. Nothing had ever survived the gauntlet. The Verith had tested it twice against their own obsolete vessels to verify its effectiveness, and both times the result had been the same: total destruction in under 4 minutes. The inexorable arrived at the entrance to the corridor and stopped on the Bridge the Avera had been processing the sensor data for 6 minutes before the ship reached the stopping point. When she spoke, her voice was its usual measured tone, but there was something in the pace of her words, a slight increase in density, more information per sentence. That indicated she was working hard. 207 warships, she said, 3 battle stations, approximately 340 weapons platforms built into the corridor edges. The weapons platform density creates a fire coverage overlap of approximately 94% across the corridor width. There is no path through the corridor that avoids fire from at least 6 sources simultaneously. What's the path with the least simultaneous fire? Hale asked. Center, Vera said, Kinnaird, but it puts us in optimal targeting range for the battle stations at the far end. So we go center, Hale said. That would maximize our exposure to the battle station weapons, Vera said, but it minimizes the angle problems for the warships, Voss said, understanding his thinking. If we go center, the Verith ships on the sides have to fire across each other to hit us. Correct, Vera said. However, I must be clear, there is no path I can identify with a survival probability I would describe as comfortable. My best estimate for surviving the full corridor transit is don't tell me the number, Hale said. Vera paused. Captain, I know the number's bad, he said. Telling me won't change it, it'll just put a ceiling on what we think is possible. He looked at the tactical display, the corridor ahead under the lights of 340 weapons platforms like a field of cold stars. Vera, when we go in, I want you in full reactive mode. Don't follow a predetermined path. Read the situation in real time and give me the best options as they develop. Treat every second as a new problem. Understood, Vera said. There was a pause. Captain, I want to note that approach will produce outcomes that are genuinely difficult to predict in advance, including for me. Good, Hale said. Because it'll be difficult for them to predict too. He looked at Voss. All crew to battle stations, he said. Full power to everything, let's go. The inexorable entered the Shen corridor. At full speed, the first wave of weapons platforms opened fire immediately. A wall of light and energy converging from both sides of the corridor. Vera had calculated the timing of the platform's targeting cycles down to fractions of a second, and she moved the inexorable through the gaps in that, timing the way water moves through cracks in stone, not by being small but by being perfectly placed at the exact right moment. 3 hits, hull integrity dropped to 83%. The bridge shook hard, enough that She had to grab his console with both hands to stay in his seat. Weapons platforms on the starboard edge, sectors 4 through 7, Hale said. Focus fire. The inexorable's guns turned on the platform clusters and began systematic destruction. Not the whole wall, that would take 2 long specific clusters, creating gaps in the overlapping fire coverage, creating paths, and the first warship formation came in from the left. 20 ships in a spread formation, filling the corridor with fire. Vera turned the inexorable hard, driving it toward the right wall of the corridor, close enough to the asteroid field that 3 crew members in the starboard observation bay briefly looked out at rock, passing close enough to touch. The warship's fire went wide of where the inexorable had been. They're adjusted. Targeting solutions chased a ship that was no longer there. By the time they found her again, the inexorable was among them. This was the part that the Vreth Fleet Command would study later and struggle to explain. The standard response to superior force in a corridor is not to enter their formation. It creates confusion for the attacker. Firing solutions become difficult. More friendly fire becomes a risk, but it also means you're surrounded, which is objectively worse. No rational tactical system recommended it. The inexorable did it anyway. It plunged into the first warship formation at speed, moving through the gaps between ships at distances that made the Vreth formation commanders instinctively stop firing for fear of hitting their own vessels. In the 7 seconds it spent inside the formation, it destroyed 4 ships and disabled 2 more. Then it was through, continuing down the corridor, and the Vreth formation was scrambling to reform behind it. Second formation incoming, OC said. His voice was still steady. He had found something in the last few minutes, not comfort but clarity. He knew what to do. He just had to keep doing it. 30 ships, 1200, X spread wide. Vera Hale said. I see them, Vera said. Captain, there is a gap on the left edge, a platform cluster we disabled. The first 30 seconds has created a 2.3 km opening in the coverage field. If we go through it, we reduce the incoming fire by 40% for approximately 8 seconds. Do it, Hale said. It puts us very close to the asteroid field, Vera said. How close, boss? Asked. Very, Vera said. The inexorable turned hard left and drove toward the asteroid field edge. The second breath formation, which had spread wide specifically to prevent this kind of evasive move, had not accounted for anyone being willing to go that close to the asteroids. If their spread formation now had a problem, the ships on the left side were too close to fire without risking hitting the asteroid field themselves, and the ships on the right side were too far away for accurate fire at the angle the inexorable was presenting. They fired anyway, less accurate, but there was a lot of them. The inexorable took 7 hits in 4 seconds. Bridge lights went red. Hull integrity dropped to 71%. A section of the lower port corridor depressurized, and the emergency seals came down automatically. 3 people who had been in that corridor had made it to sealed sections. In time, one had not. His name was Corporal James Witz. He had been 24 years old. He had a younger sister back on Earth who was going to university in the fall. The inexorable kept moving, on turn on the Comcord's live sensor feed, which was now being watched by delegates who had not left the chamber in 8 hours. The data was almost incomprehensible. The inexorable was a small moving light in a storm of weapons fire, and it kept not dying when it should have been dying. The feed had no sound, which somehow made it worse or better, depending on your perspective. In silence, it looked almost like something abstract, a moving point of light that refused to stop moving. The SHREAL ambassador had not sat down. In 3 hours, he stood at the observation window with a Vathan elder beside him, both of them watching the feed on a secondary screen. Around the room, other species were watching too. Some had brought food and forgotten to eat it. Some were making notes. Some were simply still. And the Marath representative was sitting on the floor beside her chair, which was unusual enough that her aide had asked if she needed assistance. She had said no, she just needed to sit down. How much of the corridor have they passed? The Vulcan elder asked. Approximately 60%, the SH ambassador said. He did not take his eyes off the screen. It should not still be moving, the elder said. No. The ambassador agreed, it should not. Yale Morrow was not watching the screen. She was sitting at the human delegation table with her eyes closed. Her communications device had given her one update: hull integrity 71%. Crew casualties, 1 ship operational. And she had held it in both hands for a moment before setting it back on the table. 1. She knew every person on that ship. Well, not personally, or rather you could not know 300 people personally. But she had read every file. She knew their names, their ages, where they were from, what they were good at, why they had volunteered. She carried all of them in some way that was not quite grief and not quite pride, and was something that had no good name. She sat with her eyes closed and waited. In the final third of the Shen corridor, the 3 battle stations opened fire. Their weapons were different from anything the inexorable had encountered. They were designed for exactly this: a target that had made it this far, that was moving unpredictably, that had proven hard to kill. The battle stations were the gauntlets. Answer to persistence: you could dodge. Warships: you could break through formation walls. But the battle stations could track and hit a target moving at any speed from any angle, with a sustained fire rate that left no consistent gaps. Vera's calculations started coming in. Fragments. Incoming fire pattern does not have consistent timing gaps, she reported. I cannot identify a predictable dodge window. Then we don't dodge, Hale said. We go through. Captain, that means taking direct hits from battle station weapons. Our current hull integrity, Vera, Hale said. Everything we have, power from everything non-essential, shields at maximum, all weapons on the battle stations. That will leave us with reduced life support on decks 4 through 7. Vera said, move everyone off decks 4 through 7. Hale said, do it now. Boss was already relaying the orders. Down the lower decks evacuated in less than 2 minutes. People moving through corridors with purpose, no panic, just movement. Dara Acoffer came up from engineering and looked at the power readings and felt the reactors surging, and thought with genuine love, you beautiful thing, give everything you've got. The inexorable drove directly at the battle stations. It took 3 direct hits from battle station weapons in 40 seconds. The first hit dropped hull integrity to 61%. The second hit opened a hole in the outer armor on the starboard side, large enough to park a transport vessel. The third hit knocked out the port thruster entirely, but the inexorable's weapons were firing the whole time, not at the warships around it, at the battle stations themselves. Concentrated fire, everything it had, and aimed at the weakest point Vera had identified in each station structure. The battle stations were enormous. They were armored, they were not indestructible. The first battle station's reactor housing collapsed under sustained fire at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, producing an explosion visible for millions of kilometers. The second went at 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The third, which had shifted its Fire to try to compensate for the loss of its partners took a direct hit to its targeting array and went blind. It continued firing but at nothing. Broad panic sweeps of energy weapons that hit nothing but empty space. Inexorable came out the far end of the Shen corridor. It was not beautiful. The starboard armor was open to space in 2 places. The port thruster was gone. Hull integrity was 58%. 8 of 22 crew members were injured. 3 more had been lost when the starboard breach had sealed a section before they could reach safety, but she was moving. She came out of the gauntlet and she kept going, trailing atmosphere from 2 decks. Her hull scored and darkened and torn in places, and she was still moving. On the bridge nobody spoke for a long moment, then raved she in a voice that was not quite steady anymore, said, "We're through." Captain Hal looked at the screen, the corridor behind them, the wreckage, the 2 destroyed battle stations, and the blinded third, the Brethren warships that had stopped pursuing, not because they had given up, but because they had run out of quarter. He looked at the photograph on Voss's console. The yellow flowers. "How far to the capital?" he asked. "Oh, she check. 18 hours, sir, at current speed with the thruster loss." "Good," Hal said. He sat back in his chair. "Vera, damage control assessment. Dara, I want everything you can give me in the next 18 hours. Let's use the time." "Understood, Captain." Dara's voice came back over the intercom. She sounded tired. She also sounded like she was already working. 18 hours to the Brethren capital. 58% whole, 1 thruster down, 4 people dead. Jonas Hale looked straight ahead at the dark and he pointed forward. Inexorable moved. The Breath capital world was called Breath Sara, which in the oldest form of their language meant something close to the first stone. It was not actually made of stone. It was a living world, green and gray and enormous, one with cities that had been building on top of each other for so long that some parts of the oldest districts had not seen natural sunlight in 400 years. It had a population of 9 billion. It had been the seat of Dominion power since before humanity had discovered fire. It had never in all of that time been threatened. The Breath Dominion's home defense fleet was the largest fleet. They had 160 warships arranged in 7 layers of overlapping coverage, positioned to intercept threats from any direction. Behind the fleet were orbital defense platforms, 40 of them, each one armed with weapons powerful enough to crack the crust of a moon. And behind the platforms was the planet itself, which had ground-based weapons, emplacements that had been installed and upgraded and expanded over centuries, and until they formed a defense grid that was, according to every Breath strategic analysis ever conducted, impenetrable. When the Inexorable's approach vector was confirmed, the home defense fleet had 9 hours to prepare. They used every minute. Supreme Commander Drathvo was there personally aboard the fleet flagship, which was positioned at the front of the outermost defensive layer. His staff had given him the full briefing, everything the Inexorable had done from the moment it crossed into Dominion space, the border skirmish, the gauntlet, the battle stations, the number of Breath ships destroyed. He had listened to all of it without interrupting, which was unusual for him. He was normally a man who asked questions. This time he just listened, and when it was done, he sat for a while without Speaking, then he said, "So what is it?" Hull integrity, Sanro, who had come with him aboard the flagship, checked. Her data, last confirmed estimate is 58% Supreme Commander. That was approximately 16 hours ago. They may have conducted repairs in transit. The vessel has repair systems of unknown capability. Thruster status. Port thruster was destroyed in the Shen corridor. They are running on 3 main thrusters, which reduces their maximum speed and turning ability somewhat. Drethvo nodded slowly. He looked at the defense formation around him. The 160 ships, the orbital platforms, the ground emplacements. He thought about what this ship had done to 40 ships, then to 200 ships and 3 battle stations. He thought about the sensor data from the gauntlet, the way it had moved through fire that should have destroyed it, taking hits that should have ended it, and coming through the other side still moving. He thought about something his tactical instructor had told him many years ago, when he was still young enough to find the old man's aphorisms irritating. The most dangerous enemy is not the strongest one. It is the one that does not stop. He thought about this for a while. Then he thought about the 9 billion people on the world below him, not in an emotional way. He was not a particularly emotional man. In a practical way. A cold, honest, practical way. He thought about the terms of the Dominion's original ultimatum to humanity. Surrender the border systems, stop resisting, accept the result. When he thought about what humanity's answer had been, 1 ship, when it arrives, he said, "Do not fire first." Sanro looked at him. "Sir, you heard me," he said. "When the human ship arrives in our home system, the fleet will hold its position and hold its fire. We will wait to see if they communicate." He looked at her steadily. "I want to hear what they have to say." Sanro was a good officer. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that this was very different from standard engagement doctrine. She simply said, "Yes, Supreme Commander," and went to issue the orders. The inexorable arrived in the Vreth home system 18 hours and 42 minutes after exiting the Shen quarter. Dara Akefer had spent most of those hours in the engineering section with her sleeves rolled up, what using repair systems and personal effort in roughly equal measure. The starboard breach had been sealed. Not perfectly, not as good as new, but enough. The hull was still showing at 63%. Her team had managed 5%, which under the circumstances was close to miraculous. The port thruster was gone, and nothing was going to fix that in 18 hours. But the remaining 3 thrusters were performing above expected output, as if the ship itself was compensating. She had not slept. She had eaten something. At some point, she could not remember what. She had talked to the ship the whole time, which Marcus had long since stopped commenting on. When the inexorable dropped out of transit speed and the Vreth capital system came up on the navigation display, she looked at it on the small screen in engineering and felt something she could not quite name. It was not triumph, it was not relief. It was something quieter than both of those. The feeling of having done a hard thing and still being here. On the bridge, Captain Hale looked at the Vreth home defense fleet and said nothing for a moment. 160 ships, orbital platforms, ground emplacements, the planet itself, enormous and ancient. The middle of it all. "Vera," he said, "are they holding Position. Yes, Vera said. There was a brief pause. They are not targeting us. They are holding their fire. Another pause, slightly longer. Captain, I want to note that this is unexpected behavior. My model suggested a 92% probability of immediate engagement. They want to talk first, Voss said. Come. And that appears to be the case, Avera agreed. Hale looked at the tactical display for a moment longer. Then he said, open a channel, standard breath. Communication frequency. Channel open, O'Shea said. Hale stood up. He straightened his jacket, an automatic gesture, the kind of thing you do before you say something important. He looked at the screen showing the Breath Home fleet, the planet behind it, the billions of lives that were in the balance of what happened next. He thought about Kepler 9. He thought about the other 2 colonies. He thought about 4 people whose names were now part of the Inexorable's permanent record. He thought about Corporal James Witts, who had been 24 years old, and his sister going to university in the fall. He thought about all of this. And then he spoke. Us, this is Captain Jonas Hale of the UES Inexorable, he said. His voice was quiet, not soft. Quiet. The difference is that soft loses its edges, and his voice kept them. I am speaking to whoever commands the fleet I am looking at. I came here because 3 human colonies were destroyed. I came here to make sure it does not happen again. I have no interest in destroying this planet. I have no interest in killing 9 billion people. That is not what we do. He paused for a moment, letting that sentence land the way he meant it to. What I want is simple, he continued. I want the survivors from the 3 colony attacks, every human being who was taken prisoner or removed during those operations, returned alive and unharmed within 48 hours. I want the Dominion's military forces withdrawn from all territory bordering human space permanently, and I want a monument built on the site of each destroyed colony, a real one built, well maintained by the Dominion forever, so that what was done there is never forgotten. Another pause. I am not asking for the Dominion surrender. I am not asking for the Dominion to stop existing. I am asking for accountability for what was done and a guarantee that it will not happen again. He looked at the screen. Those are my terms. You have 48 hours to respond. He sat back down. The channel was still open. For a moment there was nothing. Just the quiet of open space and the sound of the bridge around him, the soft hum of the reactor, the breathing of his crew. Then a voice came through. It was deep and measured, it with the careful quality of someone choosing their words. Captain Hal, said Supreme Commander Drathvo, I would like to ask you a question. Hal nodded slightly. Go ahead. You came here, Drathvo said, with 1 ship through everything we put in front of you alone. A pause, and then Hal. The question was not tactical. Hal understood that immediately. It was not asking about weapon systems or engine specifications. It was asking something deeper, and Drathvo had the kind of voice that made it clear he knew the difference. Hal thought about the answer. He thought about Dara in the engine room. He thought about Petra asking Way if she was scared. He thought about Fenn's grandmother and Ryosi staying steady at his station through a corridor full of fire. He thought about Voss in the photograph. Hey, because it only takes one, he said, if you know the reason for what you're doing and you believe in it. One ship is enough. One person is enough. He looked at the screen showing the planet. You attacked our homes, not our fleet, not our military installations. Our homes where people lived, where children went to school. His voice was still quiet, still without anger in it. Not because there was no anger, but because the anger had long since become something else, something harder and more lasting. We don't need a fleet for that. We just need to be sure we will not stop, and we will not stop. The channel was quiet again. When Drathos spoke, his voice was slightly different, not weaker. Older somehow, like someone who had just put down something heavy and was letting themselves feel the weight of having carried it. You got your terms, he said. Will you put them in formal diplomatic record? Yes, Hale said. Then I will review them, the Supreme Commander said. 48 hours. The channel closed in the conquered chamber. The room had been silent for a long time. The live audio of Hale's transmission had been playing on the chamber's main speakers for the last 4 minutes, and when it ended, nobody moved right away. The HFY ambassador was standing very still. The Vathan elder had his eyes closed. Several delegations were looking at each other across their tables in the specific way that people look at each other when they have just witnessed something they are not sure they understand. The Cathar representative, who had 6 days ago has stood at this podium and explained with perfect calm that humanity needed to consider the Dominion's terms, was looking at a screen showing the replay of Captain Hale's terms, her forearms folded tightly in front of her. Her expression was unreadable to most species, but those who knew her kind well enough recognized it. She was reevaluating something, probably many things. The Murith representative was standing up, which was unusual for her. She was a small species, and she stood up when she felt strongly about something. He asked for a monument, she said. Not to anyone in particular, not reparations, not power, not territory. Monument. She looked around the room, so they would not be forgotten. Nobody responded. The HFY ambassador walked slowly across the room and sat down at his delegation table. When he picked up a formal protocol pad, a device used for initiating official conquered motions, and looked at it for a moment, then he began entering something. His aide leaned over. Ambassador, what motion are you filing? I am withdrawing the provisional membership classification for humanity. He said. He did not look up from the pad. It should have been done a long time ago. His aide looked at the screen showing the inexorable in Brath home orbit. Battered, one thruster gone, hull dark, and scored in places still there. What classification will you propose? Instead, the ambassador finished the entry, full member with a formal commendation. He looked at the screen. What they have done in the last 8 days, he said quietly, is what this conquered was supposed to stand for. We debated while they acted, while we calculated while they decided. The least we can do is acknowledge that. He submitted the motion. On the screen, the inexorable held its position in Brath home orbit, steady and still, waiting. Across the Conquered's observation network on worlds that had been watching the live feeds, something was happening that was harder to quantify than fleet numbers or hull integrity percentages. Species that had been watching a damaged human warship Hold an empire to account we're talking. Not in official diplomatic channels. In the ordinary channels, the ones where people actually say what they think. On the SHREAL homeworld, a young academic was writing something about what the concept of sufficient force actually meant when applied to a species that refused to define sufficiency in the conventional way. On the Miatha home world, I did a debate was happening in public forums about whether the Concord's response to the colony attacks had been a failure of procedure or a failure of will, and the answers were uncomfortable for a lot of people. On at least a dozen worlds, children were asking their parents questions about the ship that had gone through the gauntlet. On the Kethsare home world, someone had already run the numbers. All of the numbers, every engagement, every damage figure, every tactical decision, and published a formal analysis. The conclusion section was short. It said in the precise language of Kethsare academic work, the relevant variable was not technological superiority, tactical innovation, or weapons capability. Though all three were present, either relevant variable was the complete absence of any self-preservation limit on the crew's willingness to continue. This cannot be reverse engineered. It is a cultural property. The paper was shared across the Concord's academic networks within hours. The phrase complete absence of any self-preservation limit was translated into 47 languages and argued about for years. On the inexorable 40 hours into the waiting period, Captain Hale was sitting alone in his small office with a cup of cold coffee and the door closed. He was not doing anything in particular. He was sitting, which was something he rarely let himself do. Just sit without reading reports or reviewing plans or thinking about the next problem. He was very tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix easily, with a kind of tired that accumulates over days of being responsible for 300 lives in a very dangerous place. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," he said. Voss opened the door and leaned against the frame. She had a cup of coffee too. Hers was hot, which meant she had just made it, which meant she had not been trying to sleep either. "They're going to accept," she said. "I think so too," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "4 people," she said. He looked at his cup. "Yes." She did not say anything else about it. She did not need to. They both understood that 4 people were a number that would never be just a number. James Witts and the other 3. Their names were in the record, and the record mattered. It because one of the things that Hale believed completely was that the gap between remembering and forgetting was the difference between civilizations worth being part of and ones that were not. "The crew is good," Voss said after a while. "Better than good. I've been walking the decks. They're tired. They're a bit banged up, but they're good, Jonas. They're really good." He smiled in a small one, but genuine. "I know," she pushed off from the doorframe. "Get some sleep," she said. 2 hours at least. Vera will alert us if anything changes." "Yes, Commander," he said. She snorted softly at the use of her title and left. He sat with his cold coffee for a while longer. Through the wall he could feel the faint hum of the reactor, Dara's reactor, the one she talked to, and the quiet pulse of the ship around him, moving gently in the gravity of the Freth homeworld, waiting. Below them 9 billion people were alive because 48 Hours ago, a man from Earth had looked at a planet full of people who had ordered the destruction of his kind's homes and decided that the answer was not more destruction. He hoped they understood that. He hoped they would remember it. He finished the cold coffee, set down the cup, and slept. The Vreth Dominion accepted the terms. Supreme Commander Drathvo sent the formal response through official diplomatic channels 36 hours into the waiting period, 12 hours before the deadline. The message was brief and precise and carried his personal authorization code, which meant it was not a preliminary communication or a negotiating opener. It was the final word. The survivors from the 3 colony attacks, 412 people who had been held in Dominion facilities under conditions that the eventual investigation would describe as harsh but non-lethal, were returned within 20 hours of the formal acceptance. They were transported on Dominion medical ships, which was required under the terms because some of them needed medical care. They arrived at the nearest neutral station on the Concord's border in 3 groups, confused and exhausted, and in many cases unable to fully believe that they were going home. The military withdrawal from human border space began. The same day the survivors were released, the Dominion pulled its ships back from the 7 systems in an orderly, phased movement that was completed over 2 weeks. There were no incidents during the withdrawal, no last-minute complications, no attempts to renegotiate or delay. The monuments were another matter, not because the Dominion refused. They agreed without debate, which had surprised several people in the Concord, who had expected this to be the point where the Dominion pushed back because it was the part of Hale's terms that had no strategic value for anyone. It was not a border adjustment or a military concession. It was simply a requirement to remember. Some expected a powerful and proud civilization to find it too much to accept without argument. They did not argue. They agreed, and they began planning. The reason became clear eventually, though it took some time for the explanation to reach the right people. An account written later by a Vreth cultural historian described the internal Dominion discussion about the monuments in careful terms. What the account said, translated into the simplest possible language, was this: the Dominion had agreed to the monuments, not because they were required to, but because Drathvo had made it clear to his government that the monuments were the most important part, more important than the military withdrawal, more important than the return of the survivors, because the monuments meant that humanity had chosen to hold them accountable rather than destroy them. And that choice, the restraint behind it, was the thing that the Dominion needed to understand and carry forward. Drathvo had explained it to his government this way. They could have asked for our surrender. They could have asked for territory. If they came to our home orbit with a ship that had been through everything we built, and they asked for a monument and an apology in stone, that is either the most naive thing I have ever heard or the most sophisticated. I believe it is the latter. The government had agreed with him. The inexorable came home 6 weeks after it had left. Not to parade. Hale had specifically requested that there not be a parade, which had been honored, or almost honored. There were people at the dock, not in organized rows with flags and speeches, but gathered in the way people gather. When they know something has happened that matters and they want to be near it. Families of the crew, officials who came with the quiet intention of shaking hands rather than making speeches, and ordinary people who had no particular reason to be there except that they had followed the news and they wanted to see the ship. The inexorable came in slowly, partly because of the missing thruster, which was not yet fixed, and partly because Hale had requested a slow approach. He wanted the crew to see what they were coming back to. He wanted them to have that. Dara HFY was standing in engineering, with her hand flat on the reactor housing, not because she needed to check it, but because she had spent 6 weeks being in almost constant contact with this machine, and she was not quite ready to let go of it yet. The reactor was humming at low output, gentle, warm in the way that is not actually temperature but feels like it. "We're home," she told it. "We're home," Marcus agreed from across the room, when in this time it was clearly directed at her, not the ship. But it did not matter because they meant the same thing. Captain Hale filed his after-action report 2 days after returning. He was not a man who wrote long reports. He believed that the most important things could be said in the fewest words, and that adding more words did not add more meaning. It just made the meaning harder to find. His after-action report was 3 pages long, which was extraordinarily short for the kind of mission the inexorable had undertaken. The final line read, "Mission complete, crew condition tired, ship condition repairable, enemy's understanding of humanity updated." The report was classified for 30 days, as all after-action reports were. After 30 days it was declassified and entered into the public Concord record, when, as required by the transparency provisions that humanity had fought to include in Concord membership rules 20 years ago. Within a week of declassification, it had been translated into 30 languages. That final line had been quoted more times than anyone kept track of. In the Concord chamber, things were different, not loudly different. The chamber was the same room it had always been, the same ceiling disappearing into pale blue haze, the same curved rows, the same 47 delegations in their various seats under their various lights. But the way things moved inside the room had changed. The way people talked to each other had changed. The way they talked about humanity had changed when the shrill ambassador's motion to reclassify humanity as a full member, with a formal commendation, passed by a vote of 39-6 with 2 abstentions. The 6 who voted against it did so not because they opposed humanity specifically, but on procedural grounds. They felt a formal commendation set a precedent they were uncomfortable with, a concern that the ambassador considered reasonable even though he disagreed with it. The Keth Sarathi representative who had given the speech recommending that humanity consider the Dominion's terms did something that her species very rarely did. She filed a formal self-correction diplomatic document that acknowledged that her analysis at the start of the crisis had been incomplete. It was a short document and a difficult one to write. One and everyone in the Concord who understood Keth Sarathi culture understood what it cost her. She filed it anyway. The Vothan elder requested a private meeting with Yale Morrow. They met in a Small room off the main corridor which had a window looking out at the planet below. He was very old and he moved carefully. And he sat down across from her with a deliberate attention of someone who had learned not to waste the time they had left. I told you, he said, that sending one ship was suicide. You did, she said. I was wrong, he said. He said it simply without qualification. He was old enough not to need to soften things. She looked at him. You were working from the information available at the time. I was working from assumptions that were wrong, he said, about what your species would do, about what they were capable of. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands. I have lived a long time, Director. I have seen many species do many things. I thought I understood the shape of what was possible. He looked up at her. I did not know what a determined human crew was. I understand it better now. She looked at him for a moment. What do you understand about it? He thought about the question carefully. The way he thought about everything. I understand that most species, when they calculate a fight, are calculating the cost of the fight against the value of winning, he said. It is a rational process. You weigh the loss against the gain, and you decide if it is worth it. He paused. Your crew did not do that. They did not weigh the cost. They had already decided the value of what they were protecting. The cost was not the question. The question was only, will you do what must be done? He folded his old hands together. That is a different way of thinking. It is very hard to fight someone who thinks that way. Yale. Morrow looked out the window at the planet turning below. She thought about Jonah's hail and the 4 people who did not come home. She thought about what they had decided before they left and why. It is also very hard to be them, she said quietly. The elder looked at her, then he nodded. Slowly, yes, he said, I imagine it is. The monuments were built over the following year. The first to be completed was on the site of Kepler 9. The Vreth construction team arrived 2 months after the formal agreement with materials and architects and equipment, and they built something that took 6 months to finish. It was tall, taller than required, because the lead engineer had made a decision early on that the size of the monument should reflect the size of what had been lost, and what had been lost was an entire world of people's lives. The monument was made from local stone, what remained of Kepler 9's surface, shaped into a form that was simple enough to understand and complex enough to mean something. At the base, in both Vreth script and human script, was an inscription, not an apology, something more honest than that, a statement of fact in plain language about what had happened here and what it had cost and who had been here before. The Dominion ships came. The lead engineer on the construction project was a young Vreth named Marith. He was 27 years old and had never left the Dominion before this assignment, and he had taken the posting because it was work and he needed work, not because he felt anything particular about it at the start. He was an engineer. He built things. This was a thing to build. It did not stay simple for long, working in the ash and the rock of what had once been a living colony. Marith began to understand in the physical way that working in a place teaches you things. What had actually happened here, he picked up pieces of things, a broken tool, a fragment of a building that had been someone's wall, a ceramic cup that had somehow survived mostly intact. its handle still attached, sitting upright in the ash as if someone had just set it down. He held the cup in his hands for a long time. He thought about the person who had drunk from it last. He thought about the human ship that had crossed the Dominion alone, as he thought about the captain who had come to their home orbit and asked for a monument instead of blood. He thought about that for a long time. 3 months into construction, he sent a message to his project supervisor, asking whether the monument could be made larger than the specifications required. The supervisor checked the terms of the agreement, which specified a minimum size but no maximum. It could be made larger. Selmareth redesigned the upper section. He added a second tier. He added more surface area for inscription. He did not add more words. The inscription stayed exactly as written, but he added space, room for the stone to breathe, room for the names. He had asked through official channels if there was a record of the names of the people who had lived in Kepler 9 colony. There was. It came back a list of over 40,000 names, which was longer than he had expected, and he sat with it for a full day before deciding what to do. He put every name on the monument, all 40,000, carved into the upper tier, small but clear lettering in the order they had been in the registry, not alphabetical, not by family, not by status, but in the order they had registered as residents, the order they had arrived, the order they had come to make a place their home. It took 2 additional months of work. He stayed past his original contract end date to finish it. He did not ask for additional pay. On the day the monument was completed, he stood at the base of it in the quiet of a world that no longer had anyone to make noise, and he looked up at the names carved into the stone above him. 40,000 names, 40,000 people who had planted gardens and named streets and built schools, as someone had once said in a speech he had later read, and who were gone now because of a decision made by people in rooms far from here. He found the cup, the ceramic one, the one with the handle still attached, in his jacket pocket. He had been carrying it for months. He set it down at the base of the monument, carefully upright, the way it had been when he found it. He stood there for a while. When he left, he walked slowly and he looked back once before he was too far away to see it clearly. Time passed. The Wraith Dominion did not attack human space again. Not because they could not. They rebuilt their fleet over the following decade, as nations do, and they remained a powerful force in their region of the galaxy. But something had changed in the calculation, not in their weapons or their ships, in their understanding of what would happen if they tried. The conquered changed, too slowly and imperfectly, in the way that large things change. The debate about whether collective security had failed during the colony crisis ran for years in academic and diplomatic circles, producing a great deal of writing that reached a variety of conclusions. The most cited conclusion from the most widely read paper on the subject was simple. The conquered failed to act because it calculated the cost of action. Humanity did not calculate, it decided. The distinction matters. Humanity did not become perfect. No species did. In the years that followed, there were disputes and arguments and moments where the conquered's patience with human stubbornness was tested. All humans were not always right. They were not always wise. They were loud and emotional and sometimes very difficult to deal with in a diplomatic setting, because they had a habit of caring very strongly about things and making that caring loudly known. But nobody glassed a human colony again. The inexorable was repaired over 6 months. The starboard armor was rebuilt from the original design, improved based on what the battle data had shown about how the damage had been sustained. The port thruster was replaced with a new model. The 2 deck sections that had been sealed and evacuated were rebuilt from scratch. At the end of 6 months, she was better than she had started, which was the intention. Hale was offered a promotion. He turned it down. He stayed as captain of the inexorable. He did not explain at length why, but when asked, he said that he liked the ship, which was true, and that he thought it was important for the ship to have a captain who understood her, which was also true, and that he was not done yet, which was the truest thing of all. Voss kept the photograph on her console. It was a little worn now, the edges soft, from having been touched too many times. She did not replace it with a new print. She kept the old one. Vera, for her part, quietly updated her tactical models with everything that had happened in the Shen quarter. She filed the update as a routine maintenance action. In the notes field, she wrote, "Single observation, standard probability. Models are insufficient for predicting outcomes in engagements where one party operates without a defined self-preservation threshold. Recommend recalibration of baseline human crew parameters." She spent 3 weeks recalibrating. She was never fully satisfied with the result. In the Concord's official record, there was an axiom entered in the diplomatic protocol section 2 years after the crisis in the category of informally adopted practices. It had not been proposed through official motion. It had not been debated in the chamber. It had simply appeared, as things sometimes appear when enough people understand them, in the quiet language of things everyone already knows. It was written in 47 languages, which was the full membership of the Concord at that time, and it meant the same thing in all of them, though the exact words were different. In the human translation, it read, "Do not destroy a human world, not because they will send a fleet, oh, because they will send one ship, and that ship will not stop." Nobody argued about it. There was nothing to argue about. The last thing to say belongs to Selmarath, the young Vreth engineer who built the monument on Kepler 9. He went home after the work was done, back to the Dominion, back to his job and his life and the ordinary things that fill an ordinary life when it is not being interrupted by history. He took on other projects. He built other things, bridges, public buildings, the kinds of structures that a working engineer builds when he is not building monuments on the sites of destroyed worlds. He thought about Kepler 9 sometimes. He thought about the cup. He had a daughter. Eventually, she was curious and quick, and asked a lot of questions, or the way children do when they are young enough to think the world will answer them. When she was old enough to understand history, she asked him about it. About the monument, about why he had stayed past his contract, about the cup. He told her what he remembered. He told her about the ash and the quiet in the piece of a building that had been someone's wall. He told her about the cup. He told her about the names. She listened to all of it very carefully. When he was done, she thought about it for a while, the way she thought about everything with her whole face involved. In it, the way children think when they mean it. Why did the human ship come? She asked. Just one ship. Why did they do that? He had thought about this question for years. He had turned it over many times, looked at it from different angles, watched, tried out different answers. He knew what the conquered academic papers said. He knew what the diplomatic record said. He knew what Zarathbo had said, and what the human captain had said, and what the Shriel ambassador had put in his official motion. He looked at his daughter and he gave her the answer that he believed, in the place where you believe things not because you have been told them, but because you have learned them with your hands and your time and your work. Because someone had to, he said, and they decided it was them. She thought about this. That's brave. She said, yes, he said, it is. She went back to whatever she'd been doing before, in the easy way that children move on, carrying things forward without knowing they are carrying them. And Selmarat sat for a while the way he often did now, and thought about 40,000 names carved in stone on a quiet world, and a cup sitting at the base of a monument upright the way someone had left it. The inexorable was still out there, still moving, still doing what it had been built to do, sailing the dark between stars in a galaxy that had learned slowly and imperfectly what it meant when a human ship was incoming. It meant someone had decided, and they would not stop.